So, Chuck, you were raised in the high Sierras.
We're on
Yeah, we're rolling.
7,600 feet, and it's called the June Lake Loop. And that's off of 395 and go through June Lake and then on down to us about 2 miles. And from there is the Southern Sierra Power Company and around to Silver Lake to Grant Lake, and then you're back in the Cane Ranch and you're back into 395. My dad and mother went up there in 1927 and started building a hunting and fishing lodge. My mother nursed people. She was an RN nurse, graduated from Stanford University in 1915, and immediately went in the military overseas for 2 years and got tuberculosis, and that was very difficult for her. Now, she would go and take care of all the people 60 miles to Bishop and 45 miles to Bridgeport without any medical. And she was in the middle, and she took them from the womb to the tomb. And when the snow was deep on the ground and the roads weren't open, the Southern Sierra Power Company, a mile and a half down, would send up 3 fellows with snowshoes, and they'd keep changing off the break trail, pulling a toboggan. They come, I can remember, bang, 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 bang on the door. My mother would get up and put on her trench coat and all thing, get on a pair of snowshoes and get on that toboggan, and they'd pull her 8 miles to the road there or 12 miles to the road there. She'd get cold, she'd get up and walk on the snowshoes. Long story short, she did this until I was 10 years old, and she got pneumonia, double pneumonia, and there was no medical thing, so she passed away in February.
Oh my, yeah.
And
Well,
she's known as the Angel of the Sierras. Great lady.
Angel of the Sierras.
Okay, back. I lived up there until I was 16 years old, and we had this schoolhouse in one of our cabins, and then they built a schoolhouse. You had to have 8 students for the state to have a teacher. Well, the teacher had 2, and his brother and myself was 4, and there were 3 people. The Southern Sierra Power Company made that. We made it, and now I'm at the graduating from the 6th grade. My brother and Don Killian, the teacher's son, graduated out. No longer was there enough students to have a school, so schools closed down. My father had to do something with us, so he got a hold of a lady called Alma J. O'Donnell, who was Alma J. Johannesson in World War I, a buddy of my mother. They served together, and they ended up in a tuberculosis place together, and they were dear friends, and she was Aunt Joe to me and my brother for years, and he contacted her, and she said sure she'd take us down. Now, her husband was a marshal and passed off, how I don't know, anyhow, she was by herself. And we were down there for 4 school terms and back up. Now, that was a blessing for me that I didn't know at the time, but up in the mountains, I had no sophistication. But Alma J. Johansson O'Donnell had lots of Swedish sophistication. She had a ticket to the opera and a ticket to the shows and this, and she took my brother and I to these and to all of the museums, the Blue Boy and the this and that, and Wrigley Brothers libraries, and we got some sophistication on the 4 years we were with her. That was a blessing from a country boy, which was very helpful. I didn't know it at that time. So now, my father at that time on World War II began. He stuck it out for a while, and he said, you know, I'm afraid I cannot keep this resort going because gas rationing and all. And a fellow came along, Almore, offered him $10,000 down for $25,000. Not interested. Came back 2 weeks later with a $10,000 check and said, 25,000 bucks. My dad took it. And so he moved to Bishop, California. Now I could come back there to go to school. Side issue, 5 years later, Almore sold that for $125,000. What happened? Yes, grass rationing came, and all the factories and the war workers pooled together in a car, and they'd come, and instead of staying a day or two, they'd stay a week or 2 weeks. And a guy made a fortune because of that.
Yeah.
And my dad, being it is, he says, that's fine. It was all right one at a time. I got a good price for it. I have no hard feelings. Okay, back to Bishop. In my junior year, after I turned 17, I was ready to go to the military. My brother had been drafted, and I wasn't going to be drafted. And I wanted to go. Always in my life, I wanted the best I could get. And I joined the Marine Corps, and they accepted me. I went through boot camp, and when I got out of boot camp, there was some questions of where they were going to send you to further training. And some of the questions they started asking me, and I said, oh, lived at 7,600 feet, and we traveled up to 10,000, went here and there. Oh, we'd stay 2 or 3 nights with ourselves, the 4 of us kids. And we got a unit for you, the Marine Raiders. And so I said, what are the Marine Raiders? And I said, a special unit, one that's small, that has camaraderie together. Being a football player and a basketball player, I said, I could get my arms around a team. I said, that's where I want to go. And that's how I got in the Marine Raiders, and went out from there to the San Onofre tent camp in Camp Pendleton, where there were just 10 8-man tents and dirt. There was 80 of us. Our shower was in plain daylight, and that's kind of slicky wooden things. No mess hall. We ate outside. And that's the way I went through the Marine Raiders. And when we got finished at the school, there was a blue shack that had the only flushing toilet out there, and with a bunk in there. And that's where the captain or the sergeant would stay for the night. They changed off and on. So there was one of them there all the time. On the side of that wall was a list, 2 lists. One, those who had passed Raider training were going to be sent to Camp Elliott for transferred overseas. Another one, those that hadn't made it, sent back to Camp Pendleton for further training. That was graduation exercises. So you looked up and down the list, hey, I made it to Raiders. The next day I was in a 6x truck in there like sardines, and they hauled us off to Camp Elliott. And that's where we began. From Camp Elliott, I went to New Caledonia, and I was selected out of there for the Raider Battalion, which was the 3rd Raiders, which was forming. The only Raider Battalion was formed outside the United States, and there's a lot more history to that. It was started in Samoa, and due to the malaria and all, they moved it up to New Caledonia, and it was a wonderful spot. It's a nice place. I saw lots of the beaches and all. I got to New Caledonia twice, once on a working party, the other time on Liberty for 2 hours. And that's what I had all through New Caledonia training. And up in October, we moved to Guadalcanal, where we set up our training camp. A large area there, and it was set up, and we had that from there to Bougainville, back to Emery, back to Guam, Bougainville, Emery, Guam, and Okinawa. as we worked out of there. And so I had the same tent, same street for those at the times. And after, well, there'd been an awful lot to talk about. I never had action on Tulagi. Tulagi was about 14 or 15 miles off of Guadalcanal. Now, Tulagi is where the first Marine raiders landed. Before anybody else, that was the first offensive against the Japanese.
First ground operation.
First one. And some hours later, they landed on Guadalcanal. But they were the first on Tulagi. Each of those campaigns had interesting things. I don't want to go into the blood and guts thing, but some of the interesting parts. Bougainville was the worst situation I had ever got into the whole time. We lost about half of our people. Most of that was from disease and water. Some nights we had to lay there and hold our buddy's head up on our lap so he could get some sleep. And then vice versa, 2 hours on, 2 hours off. Sometimes with 3 days in a row. And got off of that, you could just peel your socks off and your feet were sponges.
Was that because it was raining constantly, or?
Oh, it was the swamp. Yeah,
Swamp,
the
oh.
swamp. See, in the swamp, Bougainville is a swamp.
So you were sleeping in foxholes full of water?
Absolutely no foxholes. No foxhole.
No foxholes.
And one of the only real laughs I had on Bougainville was Gunny Hewley, as our gunny sergeant, came sloppy. He checked us. The gunny checks his lines out. But come nighttime, when you're back, and he came slogging by, and I was trying to pull some sand together to put my helmet on it, so it got up out of the water. And he looked down and says, "Meacham, dig that foxhole deeper." And he was smiling. We had a great laugh. And
In a swamp.
yeah, that stayed with me for life. And Gunny Hewley's son joined the Marine Corps and left with 3-star general, assistant commandant. Pretty good for a gunny sergeant. And some other humorous things happened there. I'll give you a humorous one. On Bougainville, my foxhole buddy, J.L. Young, who we'd gone and got surrounded where we were supposed to be, dry ground. And so we had a line to hold. So every day we had to go out and patrol. And 2 men in the foxhole. One always stayed in the foxhole. No outside that foxhole. So he was with the group that went out. And he had rear guard. He got front guard, rear guard, and side guard. And he was the rear guard. And he heard a rustling and he swung around, and there's a Japanese, had his rifle right in his eyes about 6 feet away. And there was a resounding click, a misfire. And Jim had him about 4 or 5 of his rounds in him before he hit the ground. He didn't want to empty it because there may be another guy there. Right. And of course, just moments later, the fellows heard the shooting and got back again. But that night, Jim said to me, "Chuck, don't stand watch, just sleep." I can't sleep. And I got a full night to sleep out of that. Yeah. Okay. On to Emeru. Emeru was an easy one. We got in there, and the majority of the Japs had gotten out just ahead of us. And things were squared away in one day. And of course, the Marine Corps, being that kind they are, we're there for over a month. About 2 or 3 days later, we were training. and we trained the whole darn time as though we were in action, which you have to train harder than what action actually is. So,
So that must have been a fantastic life experience for you then.
yeah. And then the next one is Guam. Guam was a tough one. And I'm going to digress just a moment at this point. When we went in to Bougainville, we took a little island off of there called Parada Island so that the troops could come in there without getting shot from that side. So we took that, and then the troops could come in. And when we landed in what we call a skipper's gig, a round bottom boat, lifeboat types. Not a Higgins boat or anything, because there weren't enough of those to go around. The main troops coming in had that. We didn't have that round bottom thing. You had to grab the gunwale and throw yourself over. Down you came. You didn't say what. You said plop. Whether it was 10 feet of water or a rock or whatever, sand, and up you went. A bum way. My second landing on Emeru, we had Higgins boats. So you get boom, down they go right off. Now we're to Guam, the third ones. They had these track things, metal tracks with machine guns up, but they were metal. And the back door would fall down and you come out like that. That was a real advance. They didn't have enough of them all that the doors would go down, they had to crawl over. But the first wave guys, we went in with a drop down and you could round. Now I got one more on when we go to Okinawa. If I'm talking about what happened in these years. We had what I call a floating tank. Again, it was one of these that ran on the chain, and besides that propeller thing, it had a 75 millimeter camera in the front, a cannon in the front, 30 caliber on the side, and when you went on that, they'd be looking for pillar, boom, boom, and rattle, 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 and down the gate would go, and you go out like that, and the other ones were over there like that. We were a force. So I'll go back. So landing one was a round bottom, Higgins boat, a track, and a floating camp. It was excellent.
Let me ask you a question here. So many of us who weren't in those wars, of course, have seen the pictures of the Higgins dropping the ramp,
Yeah.
like Normandy and
Yeah.
South Pacific, and running out. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say what was in their guts and their soul and their mind when that door dropped and you got, you know,
Thing on your mind.
cannons going this way and that way across the beach, and you're running into it
Get your butt out of there and on the ground.
on the ground, right?
You bet.
Crawl.
You bet. Get out there on the ground and, take care of whatever's going on. But take care and then get down. And just don't stand around what's going on. But as far as what's in your chest, you were so well trained that you were focused on what you were doing, and you knew you had to do it. So it was no time to worry about the other things. I don't know how to explain it. Sure, I'm sure you were uptight, upset, but you were trained and you were doing what you were trained to do, and it just worked out. Wasn't that like that? Okay, let's see, where were we? In Guam. The first day in Guam, we made our way up the hill 40, which is probably maybe 1,000 meters from the beach, and we got to secure our brigade attached together, because we landed there as on agate as a separate unit down by ourselves. And we got to Hill 40, and it was tough going. And we got up on the side of there, and word came over from our, we called him the skipper, Captain Stormy Sexton. And the colonel in charge said, you got to hold Hill 40 or they're going to kick our ass off the beach. Got to hold that one. So third platoon, that was us. We ended up on the hill 40 and went down and around, and then there was about 100 yards with nobody in it. And then it picked up the rest of the third and then the sixth into the beach. So things are a little difficult, getting in there and getting it. And we finally got there. Things quieted down a bit as the dark time came. And about 11 o'clock at night, here they came. And that went on till about 3 o'clock in the morning. And the next morning, directly in front of us, and there was over 700 dead Japanese, 80 somewhere on Hill 40 where we were. We took a full battalion of Japanese. They were not fast learners, right at us, and about 80 of them got over the top of us, and the rear echelon picked them off. So the next day we had to get completely reorganized. We had some problems ourselves.
What were you? What was your armament when you were on that hill?
We in our rifle companies, we had 3 rifle platoons and a weapons platoon. And weapons platoon in our rapid raider thing was 30 caliber machine gun to 60 caliber mortars. And that's what we had. And in our squad makeup, the squad leader had a Thompson machine gun. And then from there on, the BAR man, a senior assistant BAR man, and a couple riflemen, BAR. And so a squad ended up with at least anybody could get a Tommy gun had it, but in those days the corporal was the squad leader. Nowadays, Lord, I don't know what they are. And then the BAR and the assistant BAR and their 2 ones. So we had 3 BARs and a Tommy gun in a squad of 10 people. And that's a lot of firepower, And we knew how to handle it and control of fire. You didn't fire unless you saw something to do it. And talk about fire control. We were so disciplined. You could see somebody around this. As soon as you fired a shot, you gave not only your position away, but you gave your unit's position away. So you didn't just go shooting and hitting whether you had something to hit, you did, and you better find a body there too. And anyhow, this went on, I think, 45 days, and we had Guam. The next one went back to training again, as I was playing Guadalcanal. Then we're going to Okinawa. We landed on Okinawa on Easter Sunday, April Fool's Day, 1945. And in we went in what I talked about earlier, those floating tanks, as I called them. And as we came up on the shore, the 75 was pounding and the 30 cal was rattling. Down went the back, and out we went and forward. Well, resistance in the area we landed in was even below moderate. And so we went straight up across to Yantan Airfield, which was supposed to be the make for the first day. We were up there in a couple hours or so, and we had to hold. and because nobody's going to stick themselves out there in the middle of an airfield with no cover. And finally, we moved out across that airfield, like this, and got together and started up a mountain. And suddenly we got stopped. In charge of the whole operation of Okinawa was the 4-star general of the Army, Simon Bolivar Buckner. And we had pulled out ahead of everybody. Of course, we didn't know that because stop this, you got to pull back. So we had to pull back, and we would not go across that darn thing. So we went back across the airfield. So we had our back to the water and we could see anything was coming. Nothing came that night. Now the next door we had to move out, go back up, and by this time the Japanese had put people in there to defend that. We could have run over that. We could have run to the other side of that island and cut it in two that day, which I see would have been a mistake, of course, one unit out there like that. We could have done it. Well, now the advancement of military. That was, that would have been April the 2nd, 1945, was the first time I saw real support from the air for the ground. In came Corsair pilots with on the wings.
Napalm?
No, they're oh, what the heck?
Rockets.
Rockets under their wings. They're equal to a 6-inch shell. And up went a Berry pistol. And so they could, when they came in, they came right down over the top of us and let those babies go wave after wave, and up went the pistol to stop all this, and we went up. There was nothing left. Over the top we went, and we did go right down to the other side and cut that island in two. And everybody else was down there. Anyhow, they let us do it that day, and we cut that island in two and put up a defense there. Probably several days, I don't know, not a week, several days we were there. And then we had to start going to the north. And Company K had to go to the north end of the island. And our skipper, Stormy Sexton, Captain Stormy Sexton, lined us out. And here we are, a company of essentially 200, 205, by ourselves, going down that road to the end of that thing. And he'd grabbed the platoon in front, go up there and look that out, and said, climb up that hills like an Okinawa, like this, with those doggone snakes. And we'd keep going, and they'd come back down and join the back of the company. And pretty soon they're back up at the front, and they had to do it again, go back. We did that for over 100 and some miles in 5 or 6 days. And we did that all the way straight through and got to the other end of the island and set up. And we were there and we got things in good shape and all. And at that same time, Ernie Pyle, a famous writer, landed with some of the fellows off of Okinawa, the little island down there. And that's where he got killed. But we could, up there, we could see what was going on out there.
Was that Parada Island that he got
No,
killed?
no. Parada was on Bougainville.
Oh,
That island could be found. It was where Ernie Pyle got killed. We call it the octopus because the wire fire was burning up the things and it looked like. um, okay, so here we are now. We've had maybe a week's rest. I don't think it's that long. Uh, and all of a sudden, up came some 6x trucks again, and the skipper said, "Load her up. We're out of here. Pack up. Saddle up." And they were having another problem at a peninsula. Its name's got away from me. I know it well. Peninsula, some miles away from there, where the Japanese has given them a very bad time, and they needed support. So they packed us up in there and drove us over there, and we gave them the support. Now, the interesting thing here, that's the only time in all my activities overseas that I ever had a ride to any place. So, but it was taking us from one place to another place, and we filled in, and we were successful there also. And that particular area is a relatively famous firefight and all, which goes out of my mind. It's sitting here to draw those names after 70-some years. And then we went on these patrols all around to finding isolated people and this is the north part of the whole island now. In the southern part, they were having a lot of fire going on down there, where the real part of the enemies were, and we had the north part, so we're chasing people down. We're climbing mountains and jumping down about 6 foot on these terrace things, and out, down, out, down, out, down. And then you had to up, down, up, up, up. Well, all this went on, and I kind of wrecked my chest somehow, and got infected, and I got a cold, and a lot went on, and I was having real difficulty maneuvering, and I was allowed to, had a temperature over 103, so I could stay in, but you laid in a hole in the ground. Next thing you know, I had a temperature of over 105, and that's the last I remember. And they hauled me out of there someplace. How they got me off that mountain, I don't know. And next thing I know, I heard a strange buzzing in my ear and things, beautiful odor. I opened my eyes, and there stood a flight nurse. And then I'd gone to heaven, died and gone to heaven. And from there on, I went through Guam Hospital, Hawaiian Hospital, over to Oakville Hospital in Oakland, California. 8 months later, I was discharged. And that was an interesting thing, getting discharged. I spent all this time in the hospital, and finally they had me cleaned out. I was ready to go. And so the Marine Corps there, looking over the records as discharging people, found out that I'd had typing on all those 40-some minutes. Hey, he's going to go down there and type up discharge papers for people. And that lasted about 3 days, and I'm typing up things for people that had far less thing. I had over 2.5 times the amount of points for discharge. And I don't know how I did this, because you don't do this to a field officer. The major in charge came walking down, and I jumped up in front of him. And, "Sir," and I explained to him that I had 4 campaigns, I had 8 months in the hospital. I got more than 2.5 times the numbers of units to be discharged. It's December. I want to start college in January. I need to get out of here. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. 2 days later, I was discharged. I love that major. That was not neat of him. Yep. Then some interesting things happened at home, I'll tell you about. Here at sometime between December 10, 1945, when I got discharged, getting discharged, we were sent to a Navy station down north of San Francisco for discharge in a Navy station. Well, we're there overnight. Next morning, we get to discharge and it's pouring rain. And we're all lined up outside in our uniforms, pouring down rain with no coverage. And an old gunny sergeant with a mustache thing, no cover either, slopped up and down in front of us. And this went on and on and on. And finally he said, "Discharge," and left. And there we were, soaking wet. No place to dry out, no clothes. And I headed home with a duffel bag. And my regular sea bag showed up months later with all my good stuff, including my little Japanese pistol, gone. They didn't. I had some Japanese flags in there, but I had two of them they didn't find. So at least I got away with 2 Japanese flags. So I'm with my dad now, but the time I got home was probably 2, 3, 4 days. From that to January 1. At home there, and I visited all around my buddies that coming home and all that. And of course I was 20 years old, but that didn't make any difference in those days. As long as you were coming home, they let you buy a drink and all, it was fine. And my dad and I were sitting down afternoon, and he would have a beer now and then, and he had a little small bottle of whiskey there that he had sometimes. And we were talking back and forth, and he was kind of leading me into things. I didn't know it then. And when I said, "Yeah, what was I going to do?" "Well, my buddies are all coming home, and I got the GI Bill. I can go to college, I can go to some trade school, or there's 5220. That's what a lot of them are taking. For 52 weeks, you could get $20 a week. That's over $80 a month. That's what people are making. And sounds kind of good to me." My dad, we're close, and he looked across the table and took his big finger, pointed right in my face. "Son, you take that welfare and you're not welcome in my house." I was in college on the second day of January. It was a big happening. And I went through 5 years of college. In 4 years, I went 4 years with 3 double summer sessions. And I did it in 48 months. Then I took the test for junior aquatic biologist and for Cal Fish and Game, passed it, and I became a junior aquatic biologist, what I talked about, I did. Well, that went on for, oh boy, 1950, 1956. Probably 3 or 4 years. And the examination came up for assistant marine biologist and associate marine biologist. So I looked at what was required, and I applied for both of them, and they accepted me because I had lots of experience. And so now I took the written, passed, then came time for oral. And I appeared before the oral board, which was the chief of marine resources. Fine. And there was a man there, a doctor from Steinhardt Aquarium, San Francisco. I felt very good because I had brought that man so many samples of fish and ground fish. Some hadn't been located there, and we found a fish that had never been tanked. So he and I were very well acquainted. And he was sitting on there as the person from the public. I'm feeling pretty good. And the third person on the board was a man from the personnel board. So we go through the assistant marine biologist, things are going great, getting an associate, things aren't. He said, stop! You can't take this associate because you're not an assistant. But I said, sir, I've got the time. He jumped on me. So I better keep my mouth shut before I get real trouble. And so now we get back to the results of the oral. The assistant zoomed through. The associate, both the chief of marine resources and the man of the doctor of the representative public passed me. The man from the personnel board overrid them. As he said at our meeting, I can override you. And he did, and he flunked me. Now that made me really mad. And I could go and contest it and go all of that. And I said, you know, if I do that, I'll have a black ball on my name. If I win it, if I lose it, I'm in real trouble. Leave it alone. That test will come up another day. But it still festered me. And I had out of Stanford University, my office was in Petaluma, and main office was in Stanford, and I had a small one in Petaluma over the time, from Fort Bragg down to Monterey Bay, all the research there. And there was a little blue tab on the wall there, and it said, Territory of Alaska, District Biologist. And I read down, and I want that. I took it home to June and said, you know, I think I'll apply for this. And she tells me later, she just went along with it because this will ever happen here. And by golly, they came back and said, well, in Wrangell, Alaska, district biologist, and I was making a pretty good salary then, the assistant. So I got a nice raise there. And they were unhappy with me leaving, and the chief of marine resources had me over for lunch when I was leaving. And he said, I'm going to give you something, Chuck. You can return to us within 3 years with the same rating, but not the same place, but the same rating. I want to give you that privilege. I want to tell you, the good ones we lose, the bum ones we keep. And he shook my hand, and I left. And away I went up to Wrangell, Alaska, got set up in there just by myself, you know, with a family. But just one person show for the Wrangell area, which was probably the size of the state of California. But so I called up, and the chief was out in the field. They put me to the director, and I introduced myself and said I'd arrived and I was here, and I would like to know what exactly you want him to get started on and the director said, well, call me Andy. I'll call you Chuck. I'm not going to tell you what to do because you will then know when to stop. Just get going. And I took off, and I never stopped. And for about 2.5 years, helped them set. Then statehood was coming. They passed statehood, Secretary of Interior with the legislation would withhold our fisheries and natural resources for 1 year until the state could certify that they were capable. So we had a year to set up, and that was a tough year. I helped them set up the Territorial Department of Fish and Game. And I'd had all these experiences. I knew the librarians and I knew the people to touch, and I did. And they gave me a travel book that said, go staff us up. And I went to all the people I knew and got the best people I could get. And we put that baby together. And on January 1, 1960, we took over the management of the fisheries of the state of Alaska. We started out with 12 men.
I'm going to stop. Yeah, and I'll ask you some questions afterwards. Yeah.
Leslie, where did we leave it?
The the fishing game.
And you took over the state of Alaska.
Yep. And in our commercial fisheries division within the Department of Fish and Game now had 3 regions, one in the southeastern Alaska, the central region, and the Aleutian region out of
On Alaska?
yeah. Oh, come on. And I had the central region, which took off Bering River, Copper River, Prince William Sound, Cook and the Bristol Bay, and the AYK, Arctic Yukon Kuskokwim. Well over 80% of the state. But the commercial fisheries was on the coast, except we developed that Arctic. So we got started, and away we went. And to begin with, the fisheries in Bristol Bay had been so mismanagement under the federal government that it was essentially gone. Now, I'm not pointing fingers necessarily at people, but the circumstances. They had a statutory requirement for 72 hours closure for 3 days over the weekends. And if the run was coming at that time, it didn't get touched. If the run came at another time, we just wiped it out. And as a consequence, the fisheries had just almost gone. And we stumbled through the first year. And then within the next 4 or 5 years, the dates I can't pull out now, we absolutely, I was responsible, stopped all commercial fishing in Bristol Bay for salmon. Oh boy, I got to know the governor real well. That was tough going, and the fishermen. Now, fortunately, the really good fishermen, the real good guys, realized you could not have a fishery without escapement. And we suffered through this. And then long 1956 came along, and we had a run of some 25 or 30 million. And the other times, even a million fish was the whole bay. This was just, and then we were able to get huge escapements, and we were able to work through that on small years, lapping over, and just this year now, 2021, I don't have the final figures. It'll be someplace over 50 million sockeye. And Alaska is the only shining star for salmon management. And it all goes back to the beginning. And we worked our rear ends off, and we had excellent people. We worked through the Fisheries Research Institute in Seattle, the University of Washington, and we ran that baby, and look at it today. Now, during this whole time, things are going well. Foreign fisheries had developed off the shore. And I'll try to sum this up. Over the shore, 90% of the foreign fleets was off of Alaska. 90% of the foreign catch off the United States was off of Alaska. So it got real involved. And the governor was getting calls in the middle of the night from industry, senators, you name it, and he didn't have any answers. And the Fish and Game couldn't put all that together, so we put a special office in his office called Director of International Fisheries. And I was recommended from the industry and the fishermen. I didn't know the governor. The next thing I know, I had an interview with the governor. He'd traveled to Ketchikan, and I told the Commissioner of Fish and Game, you just don't go talking to the governor. I said, Governor Hickel has called and asked me to meet him in Ketchikan. And the commissioner said, if the governor called, you better go. And I went, and I was invited up to his room, and he's put his feet up on the coffee table and had a beer, and he said, you want a beer? Sure, but I didn't put my feet on the table. And had the beer and got through, had a great conversation. Shook hands and left. Oh, maybe a month later, I had another call to come to see the governor. So I called down the commissioner again. He said, you've called, you better go. And that was in June, and I went to his office, and we had a long discussion. I got through, going out, and he said, now I haven't given you that job. I went on out. And then all heck broke loose. A real bad happening of foreign fisheries on our fish, and this happened. And the governor got called in the middle of the night, and he woke up the commissioner, and the commissioner didn't have any answers. And the result is he fired the commissioner, and I got a phone call to get down here. Well, I went down there, and he said, do this tonight. Well, I'm not hired. You're hired. And that's the way it started. And I never quit. Next thing you know, Governor Hickel is chosen as Secretary of the Interior. And next thing I know, I'm in front of the Senate for Senate confirmation as a presidential appointee as Commissioner of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Interior. And that's where I went. And I was doing my duty, and things were going fine. And then Presidential Order number 3 and 5 reorganized Interior and some other units of the government. And it ended up that in my unit, Fish and Wildlife Service, the research was taken out of both the Bureau of Commissioners of Fisheries and Sport, Fish and Wildlife and moved over into a unit, in a unit, I cannot think of the name now. So that ended. I only now had a sport fish division. I no longer have a commercial fisheries division. So it takes 2 divisions to have a commissioner. So my position was abolished. So it was abolished. And what am I going to do? Well, the Secretary of Interior put me on as a consultant for time. He had a real problem with the wool growers in Southern California and all. And I was down there and working on all of that. Next thing, I got a phone call and offered me a job back in Alaska as Director of International, as Special Assistant to that then Area Director for Fish and Wildlife as a GS-15. I said, oh boy, I get to go back to Alaska with a good wage of GS-15. equal to a colonel in the military. So back I went. And I worked there on the Amchitka project and helped set up the whole area. See, now, prior to that, prior to my becoming commissioner, Alaska was operated out of Oregon, and there was only about 15 people in Alaska, the whole thing. As a commissioner, I reorganized that is to become a district. There was so much backlash from the Fish and Wildlife Service to make it a region, but have to step into a lesser classification before it could step up into the division. Okay, area, so we'll make it an area. That's all right, we'll get started. And we started moving the people from Oregon up to Alaska. There was a lot of foot dragging into Alaska, and it was becoming its own person. And then in the Bureau of Commercial Fisheries, which was being dissembled, I got them over to Kodiak, which was the head of the Kodiak, to set up an office for National Marine Fisheries Service, is what they'd taken us in and made into it. And the Coast Guard was moving its station from Seattle up into Kodiak. Senator Stevens was very active in this. So now we had a Bureau of Commercial Fish, National Marine Fisheries Service, and U.S. Coast Guard main station in Kodiak. Now we're going along fine, and now Jay Hammond, which I knew intimately well in Bristol Bay, he was my charter pilot in Bristol Bay as an individual. He later ran for the House and became the House. He ran for the Senate, made the Senate, and was really respected. And then he dropped out and said, did not rerun. Spent 2 years getting ready to run for governor. And nobody ever figured any way that a Republican, he could get that the way it was set up with all the Democrats in the work on the going to the North Slope, which had been developed then with a pipeline and all that. Well, Jay Hammond, being his own private pilot, cranked up his airplane and flew up and down there with his, pap up his tent, make his little fire, and meet with all the people. Lo and behold, when he ran for governor, one of his highest votes came from along there from the Democratic hold. They couldn't believe it. So anyway, he became governor. And he got a hold of me and, hey, Chuck, I want you to come back into the state as the Director of International Fisheries in my office, because see, it was a change of thing. We negotiated around, and I came out with a very good salary, and I said, Governor, we want to change this from Director of International Fisheries to International Fisheries and External Affairs. Because when we're start dealing now with foreign nations all over this fishery. Foreign nations understand external affairs. They don't understand Director of International Fisheries. And it worked wonderfully. And we made great strides. And along came the 200-mile limit. We were significant in that, and all of those, I like a little pride in that. We got both the Senate and the House working groups into Juneau. Who's in the room? Just myself. And we really worked on that. And it came out wonderful. And I also had an accident happening that would really facilitated this. At that time, Law of the Sea was there. And in Law of the Sea, and United Nations Law of the Sea, which is one of the largest things that ever took place, had one governor from the East Coast and one governor from the West Coast as delegates to it. And Governor Hammond was chosen, of course, from the Pacific Coast because 90% of all those foreign fishing things. And he was not going to go to these things, so he sent me. Next thing I know, it was between the governor and the ambassador, Elliot Richardson, worked out that the governor would delegate me, and I became a full delegate to the Law of the Sea, representing the Pacific Coast. Now we were meeting with heads of all the oil presidents, oil companies, presidents of banks, presidents of this, all happening in the world. This helped us very much. And we got down one of the really serious things, article, I believe it's 68 in the Law of the Sea, to do with anadromous fish. Anadromous fish are the ones that go from fresh water to salt water and back to fresh water. In all the treaties together, mainly Japanese, that were getting significant amounts of our fish on the treaty, which said, divide. Well, they were not talking about dividing of the catch, they were talking about dividing of the ocean. And all. So that got most difficult because anadromous fish have got to be saved from their wandering around to their natal stream. So the Japanese had a point that out there in the water, we get them. Well, then they weren't coming back because they had net marks on them, and they got into the fin marking and all that, and you could see and tagging, they were really getting into our fish. Long, long story. It ended up, we got into the 200-mile limit, and that extended out the 200-mile limits, and like from Hawaii or Guam, 200 mile out. And it's a long, long story, but that was a significant move forward. Now, I had accomplished what the governor had laid out for me. The Law of the Sea, the setting up the international fisheries, all of these, and I was running night and day, gone so much of the time. And when I'd hit 55 with my years of service, I could retire. So I went to the governor and I said, you know, Governor, it's time that I meet my family again. And he looked at me and shook my hand and he said, Chuck, the only thing bad about this is you're going and I'm staying. And so I retired the day I was 55, and I had an international meeting in Whitehorse on the Canadians. I went up there and met that night, and they had a great function for me. And I retired. Well, the Green Shade people couldn't stand this because it was September 21 was my birthday, and that was not a pay period thing, so you can't retire. And I said, I'm retiring. And the next day I got in the car and drove off for Anchorage. And lo and behold, they didn't retire me. They gave me 2 more weeks of work. So it came to a pay period. Well, it's all right with me. And then I retired. June and I got real acquainted with the family and ourselves. And after about 2 years, maybe I ought to do something. And maybe if I thought about consulting, I could work a little now and a little then, and be my own boss. Well, I got started off, and the bad thing that happened, it was an immediate success. and I ended up with more work than I could possibly handle. And I parceled it out then to some of those research people and became on with them as a consultant. So I had these all going on. And then some people wanted to start an offshore marine mining off of Nome, the only offshore marine mining in the United States. Another long story, how I got recommended and all, and they came to visit me at my house when I was painting. And we sat down and talked about this, and they came back about 2 weeks later with the president of the company and said, we want to hire you. We'll give you a year's probationary contract. And they gave me a nice retainer fee and so much an hour. And I could do what I wanted to do. But they had first choice. At the end of that year, they gave me an open-ended contract till they quit, you know. And a lot of wonderful things happened during this time. One of the amazing ones, they didn't have a vessel in the United States that would able to mine the grounds off of Nome. And the Jones Act of 1800 and something did not allow foreign dredges in the United States. And this is to protect the East Coast way back in those years. They found a vessel in Asia that was mining silver and dredging. Couldn't get it. So they came to me and talking, well, let's go to Washington, D.C. and see what we can do. And we went and discussed this because they were not going to dredge, they were going to mine for gold. And we had a meeting with Senator Stevens and Murkowski at breakfast and talked this in detail. Two of the gentlemen there that headed, brilliant. Both had PhD in engineering and chemistry, and one also in economics. And we had a great meeting with them, and ended up that Senator Stevens looked at me and said, don't call me, I'll call you. And then we left. About 3 weeks later, Senator Murkowski called me and said he was having a meeting with the Commissioner of Commerce. Stand by, I think we have something going here. And now, side issue, the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. from the Asian people were on this as much as I was. And at that time, the Beeman was to be sold for $1 million in Asia. And so time went by, and lo and behold, there's a new regulation came out in the Federal Register with the description for a mining vessel. And that mining vessel statute stands to today. Now we have the Abema in the United States as a mining vessel, and that's what they did, a mining vessel. All government agencies and all the do-gooders in the United States could not believe anybody could dig up the surface, mine the surface off of Nome without pollution. A long 5-year story collapsed. I did the research work on that, and we took water samples like 50 meters out, 100 meters, 500 meters, and methylated mercury is what they were worried about. Yes, there was a methylated mercury off of Nome in the soil from the days, early 1900s, when they mined gold in Nome, and they used mercury to take it out. We used no mercury whatsoever, and our effluent was cleaner than the material that went in. We sent out cleaner water, although it was muddy looking, than came in. People questioned this. They said, hey, that's your man doing the research, we won't accept it. So what do you want us to do? There's two places in the United States that studies for methylated mercury, Fish and Wildlife in Patuxent, D.C. Other one was a place in Sequim, Washington, a research unit. We sent samples to both of them. They came back the same, and they're the same as ours. This is not good enough. So, well, you go find somebody. So they did, went to find a government agency to do it. It came back. We solved everyone's questions clean. We were never stopped one day. We were never cited one day. And they were doing excellent. At that time, gold hit a downdraft, just dropped precipitatively. And it started costing them $60,000 a day to operate because the gold price had dropped. So they closed the company down. That's it. And gold then was about $270 an ounce, something like that. And they shut down the company in June. And those fellows kept me on a full payroll until the company dissolved in November. It was very nice of them to do that. But today, can you imagine what they'd be doing at $2,000 an ounce? But they had their research people up there, and we worked on the time they could work on the water, we worked. The time it was frozen over, we worked underwater on the research, and we had it figured out how they could have a unit under the water that just dug 18 inches down, where this gold was, and they could do it remotely. And if gold hadn't dropped like that, they would have run that remotely, and there'd been hardly any color, and it would really been wonderful. Okay, so from that, everything went well, and that contract, of course, ended until June. Hey, we worked long enough and did well enough, and it was 65 by then, and the winters are getting longer and colder, and I said, if we're going to move to Sequim, where I was building a house, we better do it now. So I retired out of Alaska and moved to Sequim, built the house, up we went. Things went great. June started getting trouble with Alzheimer's. My son and daughter-in-law had moved down from Alaska after 49 years, put up a nice house in Gig Harbor. We moved to Gig Harbor to be close to them for help. And we did, and June passed to November 5, 2019 from Alzheimer's. And I'm still slugging it out and trying to look forward. Thanks for the opportunity to explain this. Had I known this was coming, gentlemen, I would have had an outline and not wandered all over the world. Thank you.
May I ask your age?
I will be 96 in September 21. About 6 weeks, I guess.
Chuck, what does it mean to you to be a Raider?
Well, first it means more to be a Marine than a Raider, but secondly, a Raider. It was at that point in time the best unit in the Marine Corps, in my opinion, and I think statistics show that. And over the years, we were the first military special unit in the military. And now they have the CB, the Sea people and the Rangers and this. And today, there is a Marine Raider unit. And they're a great forth-going unit, and it's large enough now that they have grade increases within it. So I feel real proud as being a beginner in that, and it's grown up.
What does it mean to you to have a sculpture like Doug's to represent?
The sculpture is wonderful. Now, we made history. We were the first special operations, the first with dogs, the Navajo Indian people, and code talkers, and they're all depicted in the statue. And I do hope, and particularly the name around showing the name of all 8,000 that were there. Now we only were about 4,000 something in full strength, but we went through 8,000 in our 2 years.
How many of you are left?
I don't know that answer, but not many now. I went in at 17 in 2004, in 1943, and the war ended in 45. So, see, there wasn't many that could get in there. So there's those that I know of as I only know of one intimately and maybe two others, but that doesn't say the. Now we used to meet, you see, in reunions, but now the new raiders, they have their own people, and we're has-beens, but they treat us right. And there hasn't been any reunion for us in over 2 years, so I don't know what we have. And if they just have a reunion, we could get together again.
Why is it important to have a statue like this?
Well, it's history, and it should be there so people could see it. I don't know how you can communicate these things to people. They're not very energetic to dig into history, particularly a unit like this. But those that do find it very interesting.
It's a hell of a story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Also my duty.
And your duty, that's a very interesting thought.
Thank you, sir.
Who was your commanding officer?
There were 4 battalions to start with. Edson was the first, Carlson the second, Liversedge, that's me, and Roosevelt the fourth. Jimmy Roosevelt, the president's son. And Mrs. Roosevelt visited us one time in New Caledonia. My son Jimmy says, gung ho.
What does gung ho mean?
Work together.
Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks, yeah, that's great.